man clearing out his late father's garage found a box of dull yellow metal, candlesticks, a tray, a little figure, a battered old telescope, and hauled the lot to the scrap metal yard where brass pays a few dollars a kilo. What he never knew was that one candlestick pair was Georgian, worth hundreds, that the little figure was a signed piece by a named workshop worth far more, and that the whole box, red instead of weighed, was worth more than his car. That's not a coincidence. The brass was always valuable. The value was lost the moment it passed from someone who didn't know what they held to someone who did. And that gap is where the money in old brass hides. Now here's the honest truth that makes this useful. Most brass is worth very little. The average vintage brass item sells for under $50, and a lot of it barely beats scrap. So people learn to treat all brass as heavy yellow junk, and that blanket dismissal is exactly what buries the exceptions, because a small number of specific makers, eras, and origins are worth hundreds or thousands, and they sit in the same box looking almost identical to the worthless stuff. To you, it's a box of tarnished old metal to weigh in. To a collector, it's a maker, an era, an origin, a form, a set of details that decide whether you're holding scrap or a serious antique. The real question isn't whether it's worth money, it's why the valuable pieces stay so cheap and who benefits. Knowledge sits in very few hands, and a resale economy runs on it. So here are 10 common pieces of brassware people own without knowing it. One warning first, and it matters more than anything else, because with brass, people destroy value on purpose, thinking they're adding it. Do not polish it to a mirror shine, because aggressive polishing strips the natural patina and drops the value by 30 to 50%, since collectors pay for honest, untouched surfaces, not a bright modern gleam. And do not sell it for scrap until you've identified it, because the scrap buyer is counting on you seeing weight where a collector sees a maker and an age. The first is the brass candlestick, the most common valuable brass object there is, most likely to be scrapped because everyone has a pair and assumes they're worth nothing. Brass candlesticks span 6 centuries, from Gothic church prickets to Georgian home pieces, and the range at market runs from a couple of dollars to over $38,000, averaging near $1,000. The tells are specific. A genuine Georgian candlestick from the 17 and early 1800s was cast, so it shows a visible seam line up the side. Feels surprisingly heavy for its size because the old brass was denser, and often has a petal or shell-shaped base, and Georgian seamed pairs typically run $250 to $500. A perfectly uniform, seamless, lightweight stick is usually a modern reproduction. Flip it over, look for the seam and the casting, feel the weight, and leave the patina alone. The second is the Islamic, Indian, and Anglo-Indian brass, the engraved and inlaid metalware people mistake for a tourist souvenir, when the finest of it sits at the very top of the market. Cairo ware and Mamluk revival pieces inlaid with silver and copper, fine Persian engraved trays and ewers, and the best Anglo-Indian Benares ware, deeply hand-chased with figures and floral scrolls, are seriously collected, and the ceiling is enormous. A 16th century Deccan brass vessel in the form of a lion selling at Christie's for over $96,000. The tells are the depth and fineness of the hand engraving, any silver or copper inlay set into the surface, and the age and origin of the metal. The busier and finer the handwork, the more it's worth checking, because the collector reads quality in the cutting where everyone else sees jumble sale tat. The third is the brass scientific and optical instrument. The telescopes, microscopes, sextants, and surveying instruments made in brass through the 18 and 1900s, which people mistake for ornaments and price like ornaments. In fact, antique brass instruments by named makers are a serious collecting field, hunted for their precision and their engraved signatures, and a 19th century brass telescope on a stand, a cased microscope, or a marine sextant in its fitted box can bring hundreds to thousands depending on the maker and completeness. The tells are the maker's name and place engraved on the instrument, the fitted original case, and the completeness of the optics, and the name on the tube might be a maker collector's chase. The fourth is the signed maker's piece, hiding among anonymous metal, because a signed piece by a notable maker jumps in value, and the names to know turn junk drawer metal into collector's pieces. Bradley and Hubbard and Chase from America, the Austrian Hagenauer workshop whose stylized Art Deco brass figures command strong prices, Sweden's Skultuna, and Germany's WMF. A signed piece sells far above an unmarked equivalent, and the mark is often small, stamped or cast underneath. Two brass figures can sit side by side, one an anonymous cast ornament worth $10, and the other a signed Hagenauer worth hundreds, and only the person who turns it over knows which. The fifth lesson is the one that costs people the most, and with brass it comes in two halves. Read the mark and keep the patina. First, flip every piece over and look for a maker's mark, a signature, a country of origin, because the identity that separates a $1,000 piece from a scrap-weight one is almost always stamped or cast on it, and marked pieces from Vienna, Sweden, or Meriden, Connecticut carry far more than unmarked imports. Second, and this is where owners destroy value with their own hands, leave the surface alone, because the most expensive mistake in brass is polishing a genuinely old piece to a bright shine, which strips the aged patina collector's reed as evidence of age and can knock a third to a half off the price in an afternoon. The worn, darkened, honest surface is not dirt, it is the proof the piece is old. So read the base, then do nothing to the finish, because the person who cleaned it up first almost always cleaned the value away. The sixth takes that danger to its most expensive extreme, and it's the piece worth more than the whole box, disguised among the ordinary metal, and it's usually the completeness that makes or breaks it. On brass, the original parts and fittings are a huge part of the value. An antique brass lamp with its correct original shade is worth around 4 times the same lamp with a replacement. A mantel clock needs its original movement and key. A spirit kettle its stand. The danger is the scrap run, where a house clearance dealer or a metal buyer offers one round number for all the old brass, and the signed lamp, the complete clock, the cased instrument, all disappear into the weight. This is where the most people lose the most money, not because the piece looked like junk, but because it was disguised inside a transaction designed to prevent itemization, and brass is uniquely exposed because its scrap value actively tempts people to weigh it instead of read it. Grief and exhaustion are the picker's best friends, so the rule, plainly: never sell brass in a bulk lot or by weight. Never accept one price for all of it. Keep every original part and fitting together, and research each piece separately, because the entire value of a box can sit in one lamp or one clock nobody looked up. The seventh is the fireside brass people rip out and replace. The Georgian and arts and crafts hearth pieces, the brass and copper of the hearth, the fenders and curbs, the fire screens, the fire dogs, the coal scuttles and helmet-shaped chestnut warmers, the trivets, are exactly the pieces thrown out in a renovation when the antique ones are collected. A pierced Regency or Georgian brass fender, an arts and crafts hearth surrounded with repoussé decoration by a known workshop, or a fine set of fire dogs can carry real value because the era and craftsmanship show in the piercing, the hammered work, and the design. The tells are the quality of the metalwork, any maker's mark, and the age shown in the honest wear and construction. So before the old fireside brass goes in the skip, look at the workmanship, because a repoussé arts and crafts fender is a different object from a modern stamped one. We've covered candlesticks, world brass, instruments, makers, and the hearth, and the last three pull it together, starting with the reproduction that fools people, the read-it-twice story running through this whole market. Brass has been reproduced and faked more than almost any metal because it's cheap to cast and easy to age artificially, so a familiar old look tells you less than people think. Georgian candlesticks, Benares trays, and Hagenauer-style figures are all widely copied, and the reproduction usually gives itself away. Too light because the alloy is thinner, too seamless where a real casting shows a seam and hand finishing, too uniform where genuine hand engraving is irregular, and artificially darkened in a way that sits evenly, instead of collecting naturally in the recesses. So when you research, don't look at active listings, the pieces for sale with hopeful asking prices, because anyone can ask any number. Look at sold listings, what pieces actually changed hands for, and match the maker, form, origin, and age. Active listings tell you what sellers wish. Sold listings tell you the truth. The ninth is the piece that looks like solid brass but isn't, and the humble object that turns out to be war history. Two twists that cut both ways. Much decorative brass is actually brass-plated steel, or spelter, a cheap cast metal, so a magnet is your quick test, since it sticks to plated steel and not to solid brass, and solid brass has the weight and warm color that plate and spelter fake. And at the other end, the humblest pieces can carry history. Trench art, the shell casings hand-worked by soldiers into vases and ornaments, is collected, and militaria, ship's fittings, and railwayana in brass carry premiums far beyond the metal. So a familiar yellow object can be worthless plated steel, or a piece of genuine history, and the difference is in the magnet, the weight, the marks, and the story. You read the piece, not just the color. The 10th is the Grail, where every principle compounds and the ceiling disappears, the most extreme version of the central truth, that the value was lost the moment it passed from someone who knew to someone who didn't. At the very top sit the brass pieces that look like scrap in a garage, a fine inlaid Islamic or Mamluk revival vessel worth into the tens of thousands, a signed Hagenauer figure, a cased marine instrument by a named maker, a pair of seamed Georgian candlesticks, a complete Boule-style mantel clock in gilt brass, an arts and crafts fender by a known workshop. These surface in ordinary homes because in a world where most brass is worth its weight, the valuable piece looks almost exactly like the rest until you read it and weigh it in your hand. Every lesson converges here: the maker and origin, the era and form, the completeness and marks, the honest patina, the warning never to polish or scrap, and the venue, because where you sell matters as much as what. A rare piece sold to a scrap metal yard or a house clearance buyer is sold to whoever weighs it, while the person who will recognize and pay for it is a specialist metalware or antiques dealer, or an auction house that reads makers' marks and origins for a living. So here's the checklist that flips you from the person being collected from to the person who knows. Don't polish it bright, don't scrap it, don't strip the patina. Leave every honest darkened surface where it is. Turn every piece over and read the base, the maker's mark, the country of origin, because the shine is only the beginning and the mark is the truth. Test it with a magnet for solid versus plated. Keep every original fitting, shade, and case together. Never sell in a bulk lot or by weight. Research on sold listings, not active ones. And when you've found something real, Take it to a specialist, not a passerby. If you recognized even one of these, hit the like button and comment below if you've got an old piece of brass you can't identify, especially a signed, engraved, or fireside one, and I'll take a look. Subscribe if you want the part of the market the resellers already know and won't share. Because the truth under all 10 is simple. These pieces were never worthless, even in a world full of brass that nearly is. They were built to look like the ones people melt down, and the only thing standing between you and what they're really worth is knowing. That's not a coincidence either.